We are at the 50th Strawberry Fair in the Kids Park. And I'm with a really old friend, Andrew Brown, the Reverend Andy Brown.
Andy or Andrew Brown
would suffice.
Absolutely.
So, could you tell us how, when we first bumped into each other? You walked into my bookshop, I believe, in Colchester Arts Centre.
Yeah, that's right. I must have been about 19, which would make it 1983, 84.
No, it'd be about 86 because I was 86 at the Arts Centre from 86 to 90.
Oh, okay, so it's a bit older. There you go. So I'm misremembering that. Yeah, that would be right. So I'd not done very well at my A-levels because I'd discovered jazz and poetry, and I'd fallen in love with all of that. So I was busily trying to learn double bass and electric bass and reading loads of the American beat poets. So I didn't do very well in my A-levels, and I noticed an advert in the newspaper for a YTS, youth training scheme job, which was something the government was doing at the time. And my dad was basically saying to me, get a job or you're out, Sonny Jim. Yeah, the usual thing. Do something for goodness sake. So I applied for this job. I figured, oh well, working in a poetry bookshop, that's going to be pretty, that's going to be cool, isn't it, in an art centre, Colchester Art Centre? So I applied, and you invited me to come along. And then there was the interview. I don't know if you want to say anything about the interview before I do.
I didn't realise I was interviewing you.
He was interviewing me. Well, that's at least what I thought. And he sat down. We sat down in this little bookshop. It was like a little glass cubicle on one side of the main building. And we talked poetry, so I would have told you that I was interested in the American beat poets. Gary Snyder was a big deal for me at the time. And so I knew all the names, including Allen Ginsberg, but I wasn't super familiar with everything. So John went over to his left or right, I can't remember, and pulled off the shelf Allen Ginsberg's Howl, very famous poem of the Beat Generation, and simply started reading it to me. That's all I was doing. I was sitting there, and he read the whole poem to me, and said, what do you think? To which I replied, that's effing amazing, or something like that. And John said, you've got the job. And so I ended up working with John at the Art Centre for, it must have been three years.
Yeah. 3 years. And during which time, I discovered that you were a bass player.
That's right.
And so I put a ludicrous, it would have gone down very well in New York, and that's the one in Essex and Suffolk and Norfolk. A free-form jazz thing, jazz and poetry thing, combining it with some reggae and funk musicians.
Yeah.
Which it either worked very well or very badly. It never worked because apart from all I was band leader and I know nothing about music. So my only rule was no rehearsal. So and I would introduce a musician that no one had ever met before into the band on occasion. And I'd say, can you start this number fast or slow? And I'd like the saxophone or the bass or whatever to start it. So, and you went along with this.
Yeah, you said it. You said it either didn't work or whatever. I mean, it always worked because there wasn't any real model to follow. So what you got was what it was, and often it did work. At the level of entertainment, it was fun. People seemed to enjoy it. We certainly enjoyed doing it, and it was never less than interesting for everyone concerned. Sometimes it was interesting in a difficult
Yeah, well, I like the idea of musical battles on stage.
Yeah.
So one of the more interesting things, because bass works really well with spoken word. So I had two bass players. So I had Gordon Mulrain, who was the bass player with Joe Warrior, and you as a jazz, so a reggae bass player, and reggae and punk bass player, and a jazzer.
Yeah, it's also worth, for those of you who never had the pleasure of hearing it, it particularly worked because I did play electric bass. I mean, I ended up being a professional musician and played it a lot. But my primary instrument was double bass, so it was double bass and an electric bass, Gordon on electric bass. So we had two different sounds going at the bottom end.
Yeah. I mean, and of course, then we had the two unknown quantities, which was Bernard on keyboards, and he would bring whichever keyboard he'd picked up at a boot sale the week before.
There could be a toy one.
Yeah. So sometimes it would sound like, I do like to be beside seaside.
That's right.
And the other one was Nick, wasn't it?
Nick,
saxophone player, one of the drummers we had described Nick as playing the most beautiful few bars you've ever heard.
In a strawberry pear cake.
That's all right. No, we'll take a strawberry pear cake. Thank you very much. Thank you. No, it's okay. This is to prove we're live. So, thank you. So Nick and Bernard. Yeah, Nick and Bernard. Terry described, the drummer, described Nick as playing the most beautiful few bars you've ever heard in all your life, and spending the next half hour trying to screw it up. Well, it's worth. Yeah, it's worth. He was a fantastic experimental bass player.
Yeah, and it's worth pointing out again, you know, for the record, that Bernard Watson was a kind of really underrated Colchester eccentric, free jazz, really interesting guy.
And he taught me at Ipswich Art School 20 years before.
That's right, so he had that. And Mick Brannan, for those, again, who still want to check out his work, you can find it because he ended up playing with the cleaners from Venus. His name has just gone from my head. But anyway, you'll find that. So he was on some sort of pop rock records in the 80s as well, but a great free jazz player.
So I hear a band setting up next to us, but I'm hoping this is coming through okay. And then immediately they closed my bookshop at the Art Centre. You went off playing bass in all sorts of places, including the choirs at the Royal Festival Hall.
Well, yeah, I did lots of gigs and lots of records. I mean, mostly jazz records. I ended up doing a stint with Steve Harley and Cockney Rebel, so I was a bass player in that for a while. Did one record with them, Poetic Justice. So it was, I went off and I had a career as a musician.
Yeah, so I used that. We went to just after the wall came down. We did a tour of East Germany. Yep, together with just the Jazzers. So there was Simon,
Vincent, Julian. Oh dear, hang on. Yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous. What was his name? I'm going to say.
Anyway, yeah. Julian. And another poet, Kevin McCurry, who was African American. So we toured East Germany and in my old VW bus. But Andy was going to go off in the middle of the tour to gig in Paris. So Julian was carrying a double bass. So we had two double basses, the keyboards, amplification, and 5 of us in the VW bus, which limped round East Germany, and because I had the driver's seat to myself, I remember picking up 2 hitchhikers much to the dismay of everyone else in the bus because they got in with their luggage.
They did. They also saved our lives because John and I had a near-death experience. We were on the autobahn somewhere and had to turn off, and the autobahns had the exits much closer from the signs than we did. So John's beavering along, and we come off the autobahn very quickly. John hadn't fully clocked this what it was, and as we went off the off-ramp, the van went up on two wheels and hovered there, and then fell back down, and we only did that
Because of the extra weight.
because of the extra weight on the other side.
So bless their hearts.
So bless their hearts, they probably saved us from some serious injury.
And then it was very interesting time in East Germany. What was great was they loved it. They loved the music. They knew about freeform jazz.
They did, and one of the really, really great venues we played was Tacheles, which is in East Germany, and it's become a very famous, in terms of the kind of cultural history of the city, Tacheles. It was a sort of squat warehouse place with multi-floors and lots of artists. I suppose in terms of that period, because it's still East Germany when we're there, the walls come down, it's still East Germany. In that period, it's a bit like the Cavern Club was in Liverpool in some senses. It was a really amazing countercultural place, and we did 2 nights there. I think we did 2 nights, and yeah, there's crazy freeform jazz and poetry and funk, and
And they came from all over Berlin.
all over, and people loved it. We had a great time. It was really good.
And in Leipzig,
Yeah.
Leipzig was interesting because there was what had happened was some of the left-wing activists had attacked what would be the equivalent of Rupert Murdoch's press, but they were extreme right-wing, so they went to break up his printing presses. So there was a rumour that the fascists were going to attack the commune we were playing in that night. So but Julian's dad had come from Leipzig.
That's right.
And they said, don't go for it. It's where it all started. And when this rumour I watched, I'd never seen fear. I didn't realise, it was an object lesson in how, in cultural fear, really.
Yeah.
So Julian's face just, the blood just came for it. And I gave him the van keys and said, go back. And Kevin and I stayed, and we went to a different. I wouldn't leave.
No, that's right. John decided he had to see this through. Actually, nothing happened, it turned out, but I mean, it could have done. I pointed out that very few of us spoke any German. I mean, my German was absolutely minimal, and since none of us knew duck, run, cover, or anything else, maybe being in the middle of a melee where we needed to heed such words was maybe not the best. Maybe not the best strategy. But
So Kevin and I went to a cafe on the other side of East Berlin and told them what was going on. And in fact, the attack came 2 days later. But it was an interesting point in history.
yeah, it was, and it was. Actually, John and I were talking a little bit about this earlier on. I think it's probably worth saying it here. 1st of June, 2024. Because when the communist regime took over post-Second World War, effectively they kind of kept the old arguments between the left and right, between communists and basically fascists. And the raps, it just sort of crushed it down. And when the wall came down and that communist power dissolved, really the hands were off, and all of a sudden you saw, well, they were 40-year-old arguments that hadn't been settled just pop up, and they were off again. They were on the street, and it was a reminder of how long those kinds of arguments and disagreements can simmer if they're not addressed and talked through. And it was both really interesting and pretty frightening.
well, it was great,
and it was great.
and you had to disappear halfway through the tour
Yeah,
because you had a gig in Paris.
yeah. Well, there's a story about that as well because yeah, I knew I started the tour in East Germany knowing I had to make it back to Paris because I had another tour with another band, a French band, half English, half French. So I needed to catch a train. So I get on a train at Leipzig, and I catch the train to Frankfurt am Main, and then a train from Frankfurt am Main to Paris. But our translator, George, I can't remember his second name either.
Yeah.
Anyway, George, who was our German translator,
Until he put the tour together.
he put the tour together, that's right, yeah. So, yeah, much more than a translator. He still had his Communist Party card, which meant he got discount on travel. I didn't know this. We went to the station, he did all the German, he bought the ticket. I paid him, I mean, that was the deal. And he handed me the ticket and said, okay, Andrew, I've bought your ticket, there it is, that'll get you to Frankfurt am Main. He said, whatever you do, don't speak because they'll know you're not German and I paid for this on my party card. So I had to spend the whole journey from Leipzig to Frankfurt am Main pretending to be asleep in case I was woken up. I could just make noises like and hand the ticket and hope that nobody would actually ask me anything in German and I wouldn't be thrown off in the middle of East Germany and not make the tour.
Yeah, well,
My plan worked, I got there.
yeah, but I mean that was typical of what East Germany was. It was, hello, I'm fantastic. We're filming at the moment, but I'll be with you in a second. So
Lots of people coming because they all know John. That's what's going on.
Recovery's Got Talent and
Yeah.
that's the turning point.
yeah.
So we're filming an interview see, at the moment. No,
That's
there you go.
okay. No, it all adds, I think. So what was extraordinary about that point in East Germany was that something that existed in the morning didn't exist in the afternoon.
Yeah.
There was no notice of closing down venues. It was a bit like a speeded up version of what's happening now with the public sector.
That's right.
You know, at least you got a few weeks' notice.
Yeah.
And there you got a few hours.
That's right.
So, we actually did make the money we'd been promised. But the jazzers, being jazzers, and they were living off this, were worried. And so they'd wake me up at 4 o'clock in the morning and go, John, explain the money again. And I'm saying, it will all work because I've travelled the world saying it will all work. And it did. It did work. You know, if the venue was closed down one day, we'd have another venue for that evening.
That's right. Yeah.
There was some frightening points where, I mean, Cottbus, I think it was, where we stayed in the guest workers' flats.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And we had 2 nights there. And Kevin, who was African American, the old poet, realised what the N-word was in any language. And he realised that with the greetings we were getting from passing motorists were not, hello, how are you, have a wonderful time in Cottbus, but it was, they were shouting at this bunch of freaks and African Americans walking down the road. But it was the one night where I wasn't able to, I didn't have to drive the next day. So I was in a club and I said, I'm not going home, this is the one night I can drink. And I did, excessively. And everyone in the end left me. And I walked home, but I realised because all the buildings looked the same, how I found out where we lived, I hadn't the faintest idea, because it was a bit like the story in, I think it's either Dubliners or Dylan Thomas's equivalent, where he leaves a flat to get some cigarettes and goes back and doesn't. And I felt like that, but I weaved my way home and got home safely. 2 weeks after we got back, there was on the news item about how the fascists were attacking the guest workers drinks, and the block of flats where we were actually set on fire by the fascists. So it wasn't. It was an they're historic moments.
Yeah, and in fact, there's another thing that's worth saying, because everybody it was a good vibe in the band. And as John's opening words has suggested, the Reverend, I mean, I'm a Unitarian minister, albeit one of a completely non-theistic, atheistic type. He can explain that another time. But because we were in East Germany and it's really hard to get there, I really, really, really wanted to visit Wittenberg, where Luther had been. And it was a little bit out of our way. In fact, it's quite a lot. And John, being, of course, the kind of guy he is, said, yeah, we'll drive there. So we had this insane loop so I could get out in Wittenberg, look around these famous places where, the Schlosskirche, where we nailed his 95 Theses. But when we got there, it was made quite clear to me I had half an hour moving on. So I had to run around this almost deserted town, no tourists, of course, piles of brown coal and smoke, because everything's really still like that. I had half an hour of exhausting running around these very famous sites, let back in the van, and then we got to the gig. So it was a wonderful mix of...
Yeah, no, we went to a demonstration against, because all the secret files that the Stasi had been moved given to the West German police. And, that wasn't what, I mean, it's worth mentioning that one of the moving forces and the changes was sort of a people's left-wing forum, but they got completely wiped out. They became irrelevant when capitalism took over. I remember just walking by the river, and there was no bird life because it was really polluted. Yeah. And I saw this kingfisher flying up and down the ravine, and I'd had enough fun. I'd walked. They were great, but I sometimes need an early morning walk. and I walked 2 miles one way, and there was this old broken factory with belching out brown smoke, and 2 workers sitting on the bridge telling me it was forbidden to go any further. Yeah. And I thought, that's everything wrong with where we're coming from. And I walked 2 miles the other way, and there was a part where there was a trade show. It was like, everybody's going to be able to afford this. And I thought, and as it turned out, people were selling their farms to get a Mercedes and so forth. I thought that's everything that is wrong with the other way.
Yeah.
And with what they're walking into. The new forum sort of just fell down a hole in the middle.
It did. And in fact, if you may remember, when we were in Halle, I spent a lot of time in Halle in a youth hostel. One day we arrived and the streets had nothing really parked up. I mean, old, what was the car called? I've forgotten the car. Trabants, that's right, old Trabbies. So a few of those. But then another day we walked down there and this entire street was filled with brand new Mercedes, Western German number plates. We assumed they were people checking out property and things like that. And by the time we got back in the evening, they'd all been sprayed up with graffiti. Various anti-capitalist graffiti. Because that's a real reminder. I remember George telling us that a lot of the early organisers of the demonstrations which brought down East Germany and then ultimately, of course, the Soviet Union a few years later, they were actually interested in implementing for real the East German constitution, which of course is a socialist institution. It's actually a remarkable document. If you read it on the surface, they were interested in having that come real. And so that drove them. And then when the wall did come down and the so-called revolution happened, well, it wasn't a socialist or even social democratic vision that came across. It was capitalism with a capital C.
And when we were demonstrating against the spiles, we were accused of being Stalinists.
Yeah.
So it was
Which we weren't, I hasten to add.
no.
Stalin is one of my least favourite people on the planet.
Yeah. So we went from there, and then sort of you pointed out to me that eventually, the Sound Proposition, which was the name of the group, that if I continued with them, I probably wouldn't eat, because it wasn't much as we are anti-capitalist, to have a combo that would do well in New York was not a sustainable financial proposition.
No. That's right. It was the Sound Proposition was not
A sound proposition financially, but as you pointed out in an earlier conversation, Dave, to be a musician at all isn't a sound financial proposition, because you were going through some records of another musician as an executor, and you had the books of what they were paid in the 70s and 80s, and what they were paid in the 90s, and what you're paid now, and it is a steady decline.
That's right.
So, and although much as we would like to fight inflation, I'm not sure, it should all be done by the musicians. And then the one place they could get work was Europe, where they could be paid properly. And now it's almost impossible. The paperwork is just so phenomenally difficult because of Brexit. And not only that, I discovered when I was last working in Europe that any festival in Europe that's funded by the European Union cannot have British artists unless they can show that not so much as a cup of coffee was paid out of the grant. So effectively, the one way of making a living as a musician has been taken away from us by Brexit.
Yeah, and so the band that I went to tour with while we were in East Germany, went back, this guitarist called Peter Oxy, a very fine guitarist, and he had a band called the New Notes Quartet. That's what I was touring with, a kind of jazz fusion outfit. But I also worked with him in a trio, and we made a trio album in Osnabrück in Germany, and that would be 1995. And it was fun, very well. We were three British musicians, one of whom, Peter the guitarist, lived in Paris, and Russ Morgan, the drummer, and I was the bass player. We lived in the UK. We all went to Osnabrück, Germany, to record the album, which was called East Coast Joy after the old LNER railway posters, because we're very East Anglian and love that whole vibe of holidays. So it was a very English sounding album, kind of jazz fusion trio again. But when we came to putting the record together, and the colour scheme was blue, the cover was blue, that's what you need to know. So we wondered what to put on the CD. It could just be a blue CD. We realised, we've got a blue round circle, why don't we put on the European flag, the golden flag, the golden stars, to make the European flag on the CD, because though we were being a very English band, but we recognised we were European musicians. This was a European culture, and we were really proud and delighted that we could do that. And now, of course, that dream is gone. Just going over there to do a recording or do a tour is, as John says, it's worse than it was before the single market. Because I remember I toured and I could just cover up the instruments and pretend I was driving around a used car. But now it's got so much that it can't, that sort of blagging your way through. You had to blag, but I mean, at that point, we didn't have to blag our way.
Well, that was what I most remember with that tour of East Germany. Because before, I used to freak out at every border, hoping they just look at the card because I never was stamped on the way into Holland. When we went on that tour, we drove through 5 borders without being stopped. The band just went straight through, and I thought, this is heaven.
Yeah, heaven.
And so since then, we haven't done much together, except he's got a great venue next to his church. I mean, if anyone's looking for a venue and doesn't want him to be the promoter, but just wants to put something on, you know, and they're in Cambridge. No parking, unfortunately, but you know, green agenda and all that. So, and partly, and I remember when you took the gig, Steve Harley had offered you the tour, and you said,
It's not quite. It's not quite this. You're nearly right.
yeah, but he could have. he could. But you said to him, "How regular can this be?" And you said, "Well, not regular." He said, "Well, I've got a regular gig."
Yeah, that could have done.
I'm paraphrasing.
You are paraphrasing. Yeah, what happened? It's a good story, but thank you for reminding me because it's a good one. Dear old Steve, who alas has just died. I enjoyed working with him. But, I mean, he could, like everybody, he could be a bit snappy, especially if you were in the band and you were telling him you weren't going to play. So he offered me this gig, European tour, and I got to make money. I was teaching, and I was teaching at Anglia Ruskin University. Now Anglia, what is it? Oh no, sorry, it was Anglia APU, Anglia Polytechnic. Now it's Anglia Ruskin University. And I said, well, how much am I going to get paid? He said, oh, don't worry about it. It'll be, enough. And I said, well, how much money? And he said, well, it'll be fine. I said, I'm not interested in knowing it's a fine amount of money. I want to know how much money, because I'm going to have to change my teaching schedule. And we carried on talking like this for a bit, at which point he said, well, do you want the gig or not? And I said, well, actually, no, I can't say yes. To which he replied marvellously, it's a summing up of my career. He said, I can't believe you're losing the opportunity to make this much money for dribs and drabs and filth. So since then I've described my career, which has been fun, some of it with John, as a career of dribs, drabs and filth.
Marvellous. And on that moment, thank you very much, Mr. Brown. Thank you.